We need all the best talent on those problems, and we won't have that unless we have diversity across all of STEM. It's also important to say at the outset that when it comes to the concept of diversity and gender diversity in STEM, there's actually a lot of variability across the S, the T, the E, and the M. So, for example, in the case of engineering, we start right at the very outset of the engineering profession, unfortunately. So it still pains me to say that we have a profession that only manages to attract 7% of engineering apprentices who are women and 16% of undergraduates who are female. Those are really shocking statistics. You'll find that in other subjects like the biosciences, women might be the majority at the start of the profession, but participation tails off. And I think there is no part of STEM that would feel very proud of the progression of women to the very senior levels of the profession. So it's really fantastic to see such a great group of you here today to help us think about what we can do both individually and collectively to improve that situation. I'm going to just do a bit of housekeeping before we get on to the meat of the evening. There are no scheduled fire alarms, so if you do hear a loud alarm, please follow members of the staff team here who will make themselves known to you. There are exits both sides, and the muster point is to the left of the building. If you haven't found the bathrooms, there is some on this level, just past the lifts, and if you also take the lifts down to -1, you'll find lots more facilities there. And I would ask you to put your mobile phones to silent, please, but feel free to tweet to your heart's content using the hashtag CMIWomen. I would also like to flag up the fact that we are filming tonight's event. As you can imagine, there were some people who weren't able to attend, unfortunately, because of the particular situation we find ourselves in. So we are going to hopefully reach many more people through the filming, and hopefully that's fine by everyone who's here. The other thing, which is a new addition to our roster of housekeeping items, is that in light of the situation with COVID-19, at the Academy we've taken the decision that we won't shake hands at events, and for the lucky few of you who would have been greeted with hugs and kisses, I'm afraid those are off the agenda as well. But of course there are alternatives. I've seen many people extending the elbow of friendship, but equally if you are uncomfortable with that, please feel free to say so. Right. Back onto safer territory, hopefully. We have two questions that we've been asked to address tonight. The first is, what can we do as individuals to help more women reach the highest level of our STEM industries? And the second question is, what role can men play as allies to help that change come about? So I've just been asked to kick things off to get the ball rolling with just a few of my own experiences and just talk a bit about who and what's helped me to progress, and the ways in which others, and men in particular, can help women to progress in STEM. So I'm going to just very briefly touch on three things. The first is that men and others in majority groups are crucial to setting culture. There are more of you than there are women, so how you behave makes a massive difference to how we all experience culture. Over the years, I think it's been an almost universal trend that those of us that have worked on diversity, this is certainly true in the Academy, have realised that we actually can't achieve any sustainable improvements in diversity unless we're also addressing culture simultaneously. So typically we've moved from diversity to diversity and inclusion. And what I mean by an inclusive culture is simply one where everyone feels valued, they feel safe, they feel welcome, they feel able to contribute to their best. It's a culture where uniqueness, your sense of what makes you you, your individuality, can comfortably coexist alongside your sense of belongingness, to use a jargon, which just means the feeling of being at home in a community, the feeling of being part of a group. In an inclusive culture, you are more likely to attract and retain diverse talent. And crucially, you're also more likely to be able to extract the benefits associated with diverse teams. And a really important feature of an inclusive culture is that it's something that everybody can contribute to and everybody can benefit from, including men and others in majority groups. And that really matters for a profession like engineering, where nearly 90% of the profession are men and over 90% are white. So it's been really fantastic to see the growing emphasis on men as allies, or majority allies. It reflects a massive power that men have to create the conditions in which progress on diversity and inclusion can accelerate. At the Academy, we recently created a Majority Allies Toolkit to help make it really easy and practical for people in majority groups to support colleagues and to be really effective champions for diversity and inclusion. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that today. The second topic I just want to touch on is the topic of visibility, invisibility. Some of you will have heard me mention this before, but I think it's really interesting just looking back maybe 3 or 4 years, I think I felt pretty much invisible. And actually, if you looked externally, I didn't have any profile at all. My focus was all about making the organisation look good, doing the best job I possibly could. And then, of course, when I became the chief executive of this organisation at the start of 2018, I felt like someone had given me a hyper-visibility cloak. And suddenly the answer to everything, who could do this, who'd you like to speak there, is, oh, Hayatan can. Now, in lots of ways, that's really lovely. It's flattering, it's great, you feel privileged. I'm hopefully trying to use my platform to do useful things. But I can't help thinking, but I'm basically the same person that I was before I got that visibility. And I think that speaks a lot to the value of sponsorship and the value of having the courage to back people who other people yet haven't backed. We all like to think we're very rational beings, our judgment is excellent and sound and based on evidence. But a lot of the time, we're looking for cues from others to say, this person is good, this person is ready. And I'd really love all of us to think, how can we help those people who are from underrepresented groups? How can we help women to get there faster, get to those positions of influence faster by raising their visibility, by publicly backing them, by championing their potential? And not to give in to that instinct that maybe, that's a slightly courageous thing to do. This is the right thing to do, and the more of us that can do it, the better. And then lastly, the point I wanted to make was the power of peers. So it's really lovely to see such a great mix of career stages and ages in the room today, and that's really important. I think a lot of the time, because we know that strong, committed leadership is so crucial to advancing progress on D&I, to effecting change, sometimes we focus a lot at the most senior levels. But actually, when I look back over my career, I think that some of the people who were most influential in my development were actually my peers. I've been really fortunate to get a great group of sort of work friends, colleagues from other organisations that I will meet up with regularly. And even now, some of us meet up and do active peer coaching. We get together, we bring our work problems, we talk about it. We find ways to support each other. And I think one of the reasons that peer coaching works so well is because the world of work is changing fast. And sometimes what I find is that people who started their career decades before maybe I did have still got loads of great wisdom, but what my peers have that maybe some of those people in very senior roles who've been there a long time don't have to the same degree is empathy. That kind of lived experience of how it is now to be at this particular career stage or this particular life stage sometimes. And another reason I found that really, really helpful is I think it's just so much easier to give other people advice than it is to, well, maybe you can give yourself advice, but to take it is another matter. And so I think that those peers really helped me stand up more and argue more and fight more for things in the workplace than I instinctively felt comfortable doing. They helped me stay positive and determined when actually, kind of life was flinging things at me that were wearing me down. And I genuinely don't think I'd be where I am now without those peers. So shout out to all of them. They know who they are. So I'm going to be hanging around for a while, so I'll be joining in some of the discussions. But now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Catherine Bennett, a CVE. She is Senior Vice President at Airbus and Head of Women in Aviation. And I'm annoyed that her biography doesn't say this, but she is officially a totally awesome champion for diversity. So, Catherine, could you come up and talk us through your experience? Thank you.
Thank you, Houghton. You're totally awesome too, so let's have a lot of mutual admiration here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I don't know about you, but sometimes on a Sunday night I look in my diary and think, what am I doing this week? And I thought, what am I doing this evening? And when I looked it up, I thought, yeah, what am I doing this evening? And I read up about CMI, and I now know a lot more about you than I probably did last week, and I'm really impressed. I actually found myself browsing through some of your courses, so a great organisation, and I look forward to working with you. Also, thank you to the Royal Academy. I was only here last week, realised for another Women in Transport event, and so, I'm happy to come next week as well. I'll see you there. So, International Women's Day yesterday, each for equal. I hope you've all done your photos. Can't remember, it's that way around, I think. I don't know about you, but I felt that this year it's had a really high profile. Maybe it's because it actually was on a Sunday, which meant that you could do a lot of weekday things building up to it. But it's had great profile and great attention. I was delighted. I found myself, I did 3 speeches on this topic last week, and even I did one in my little village in Wiltshire yesterday. I was asked to do that. But of course, today is my favourite opportunity to talk about International Women's Day. Now, a lot of people maybe question, is there really a need for us to do International Women's Day? Well, my answer is absolutely yes. Because we can theme events around it, we can get some discussions going that we might otherwise not have had. Maybe one day we won't need an International Women's Day, but I don't think we're there yet. And let's continue and be even more active. And when I was preparing for the speech today, I was thinking, in my lifetime, I'm happy to tell you I'm 52, in my lifetime, there were still quite a lot of rules that were very strange for women. Let's have a think. It was only back in 1975 when women could open bank accounts. That may seem unbelievable to the younger people in the audience. You couldn't get a mortgage, you couldn't buy a car, you couldn't get a lot of life insurance policies unless you were married and your husband did it for you. That's astonishing in my lifetime. As more recently as 1982, when I think I was doing my O-levels, shows how old I am because it wasn't GCSEs, it was only then, in 1982, that pubs were allowed to serve women. That's, again, absolutely unbelievable to think that wasn't that long ago. And as some of you may know, as well as being at Airbus now, my career before was in the car industry. So I joined there in 96, and I still remember going to the British Motor Show and seeing women in bikinis draped over bonnets. And that wasn't that long ago. And sadly, if I'm honest, I've been to an international air show in Paris about a decade ago, where I saw airline stewardesses objectified as women at a press conference, which I found very, very uncomfortable. So there are still things happening and still things to be called out. But let's just go back to the celebrations of this week. There's been quite a lot of other news about women. Back on Saturday, the 29th of February, what could we do if we wanted to? Propose. We could do that. Aren't we lucky to be allowed to do that once every 4 years? There was also another bit of news I saw on my local news down in the West Country, that a lady called Vicky Cook was appointed as the first female manager of a major men's football club. She was actually an international soccer player. Minehead United, which you may not say is the biggest club in the world, but a wonderful story about her on the local news. A, it's a bit sad that it became such a big story, but B, she was very sassy in the interview she did, and she said, actually, since my appointment, the club has won every single match, and she said, just imagine if we hadn't, how much criticism there would have been. Another quiz question for you. Last Thursday was what? It was World Book, somebody's getting it, thank you, World Book Day. So as well as children dressing up as Harry Potter characters or Alice in Wonderland, or maybe in my case it would have been Mad Hatter, it made me think again about women's writers, women authors. My great-great-grandfather, Mr. William Aylott, ran a publishing house called Aylott Publishing. And he was the first publishing house to publish Charlotte Bronte. So what was interesting, of course, he published her poems, that, of course, her books were not published in the name Charlotte Bronte. They were published in an androgynous name, Courier Bell. So things are changing, and thank goodness we can be published in a female name now. So I was asked to talk a bit, as Hayatan just did, about my career. I am not an engineer, but I love working with engineers. I remember when I first joined Airbus, my boss at the time was an engineer, and he said, right, Catherine, let me explain this to you. And he started drawing a graph and a table, and I'm like, oh, but I'm an art student. I like words, you know, I like feelings. He's like, no, this is it. This is how it's done. And then I realized my whole mindset had to change because I joined this new culture. You mentioned culture earlier. When I worked at Vauxhall, I had quite a few challenges and things that really made me grow up. Sadly, we announced the closure of one of our car plants, and I really was at the main external facing person, dealing with the government and the media and the local authorities, explaining why we chose to close a car plant. And I took it on so personally. It was like it was my decision. And it was really affecting my mental state, actually. And I remember driving home one evening, and it suddenly dawned on me that it wasn't my fault. I had really had to learn detachment. That was a hard lesson to learn, but something, male or female, that you need to learn in your professional life. I had a wonderful experience when I was with Vauxhall because I went to work in Detroit, a whole other cultural story to tell there. So I joined Airbus 2004, as I said, worked with a whole load of engineers. And one of the most interesting things about Airbus is obviously very global, international organisation. And there was a great phrase in the Times newspaper that once said that Airbus is politics with wings on it. And my goodness, is that true? But I'm very proud of the projects that we work with on the government and all our stakeholders. Research and technology, I love learning about our new technology and the innovation we're working on. I like to make the point that every pound you spend in aerospace, you get £10 value back, so it's worth doing. Had some time working in Toulouse, again, another cultural experience. I saw how other countries operate, how other governments deal with my company. And also I had to deal with some quite high-profile topics. Of course, Airbus wasn't backward in coming forward on our view on Brexit. I know we're not meant to mention that word anymore, but it certainly put some of us right there into the public eye. And I had some interesting examples when I was doing some of the media interviews. I was on Andrew Marr, who I have to say was very kind to me. I know they're trying to get more women, business women, onto that programme. Maybe Jon Snow from Channel 4 News could have been a bit more careful in his words, because when I walked in to be interviewed by him, he said, gosh, you're very young to be a vice president. And to which I said, well, actually, I'm a senior vice president, so I'm extremely young. So you have to kind of tackle these things in the right way. I'm delighted to serve on the Made Smarter Commission with Houghton. Industrial strategy has been a real opportunity to get some strong messages over. And just last November, I was appointed chair of the new powerhouse in the UK to be equivalent, or better, of the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine, and that's an initiative called the Western Gateway, so I'm just getting going with that. The other thing I was asked to talk about was the gender diversity activity. So 18 months ago, I was involved in setting up a thing called the Charter for Aviation and Aerospace. I'm really proud, just as of end of last week, we've now got 200 organisations signed up to that. It's a commitment to encourage the number of women that you employ, the number of women at a high level in organisation, to share best practice and to look at things like you're talking about today, the promotion of STEM. And I also was very involved in helping set up a similar charter for women in defence. So I'm not quite sure what my next project is, but I'll find something. I'm also very involved in an organisation called the International Aviation Women's Association, which is global. And I'm very proud of the work we do there. We have done 58 scholarships around the world at various universities. And just last year, we announced a scholarship with Cranfield University. Really pleased to hear a couple of weeks ago that we've already had over 20 applicants for that scholarship, so need to keep flying the flag there. I thought just quickly I'd touch on a few observations about ways of working. Just a few little stories for you, which I'm sure you've heard from other women in business. Maybe I won't touch on the time that I was the only woman in a meeting and they decided to pick on my clothes that I'd chosen to wear that day. Perhaps I won't tell you about the time I was in a meeting, again the only woman, and the boss of the meeting said when I answered back to him or challenged him on something, that's exactly what I would expect from the pink and fluffy department. I won't perhaps tell you about the time I went to a meeting in a London club, literally down the road from here. It was an external meeting, And again, the only woman attending the meeting, and I was told I had to go up the back stairs. Very strange. But there are so many stories that you can hear about, but I really want to be positive here. For me, you are different, you stand out a bit, we want more diversity, but whilst you are different, maybe the only woman in a room, use it. Use it. You need to get more visibility. If they know who you are, that's helpful. Focus and get them to listen to you. Michelle Obama did a great quote recently, which says, if you don't take control of your image, somebody else will. So look after your visibility. Networking, events like this, use LinkedIn. There's so many opportunities that we can all help each other. And you know, that wonderful book, Lean In, read that book. Think about some of the techniques there. The other thing I would say is that I have great faith in the next generation. My nephew, who's in his second year studying at Exeter University, said to me the other day, Auntie Catherine, why do you keep going on about gender diversity the whole time? We're all, you know, we don't see each other any different. For him, it wasn't an issue. And I said, please keep that. Don't ever change your view. But in terms of the charter I've worked on, there's been some wonderful young men in aerospace who have spent tons and tons of time working with us on the charter. One gentleman from Ghana, and I said to him, why have you put so much time into this? And he said, Catherine, my mother was a single mother. She had 3 kids, and she worked so hard to look after us all. She continued to work, and I want more women to be able to do what she did, and she's a real inspiration for me. And I was like quite moved, and every time I see him, I talk to him about that. But just finally, my final bit of advice is, perhaps during the Brexit days, we lost some of our manners in this country. I'd like to say, let's go back to some good old-fashioned politeness and courtesy. And also, use humour. If you're going to stand out in the room, endeavour to speak up using your humour. And there's a wonderful, wonderful quote I like from Eleanor Roosevelt, which those of you who know me know I'm a little bit like this. Well-behaved women seldom make history. Thank you.
So thank you to both Hayat and Catherine for some fabulous words of wisdom. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anne Franke. I'm the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and we are going to make our way here where for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to just ask some questions of our 2 wonderful speakers. Now, my first question, and I did pre-warn them, is I find it really interesting. You both are incredible leaders, standout leaders in STEM. You're both women. And obviously representing technical fields, engineering, and yet you're not, as you both have admitted, engineers. And in a profession where so much of the leadership is male, have there been moments where you've found you've had to overcome difficulties as a result of that? And would you share some of those? Let's start with you, Hayat.
Yes, is the answer. The first thing I'd say is, so just as I didn't talk about it today, I know you know about it. Originally, I was a biochemist, so I worked in medical research and I did a PhD. So I spent 8 years studying and researching a subject that's very closely allied to engineering. It's not engineering, but you know, it's on the continuum of subjects that are relevant. And then I spent pretty much all my professional life working in engineering. But honestly, until I took this job as CEO, I was acutely conscious of the fact I wasn't an engineer. Lots of people say things like, she's very good despite the fact she's not an engineer. I'm not exaggerating. And I think I always felt, you know, I guess in some way I didn't belong as much as a result of that. And it took a conscious effort to say, well, that doesn't have to constrain me. This is something that's surmountable. And actually, I know a lot more about, for example, the interface between engineering and biology than many of the engineers who've got their chartership and have been working a totally different field for decades. So it's both at the sort of level of technical stuff and at the sort of conceptual level, not that relevant. And plus, thank God, nobody's ever asked me to do any engineering. That's not what my roles have been about. So I think one of the things I take away from that is that engineering is a profession that has to be careful not to be too inward-looking. I actually think when we consider our skills and diversity challenges, so up to 59,000 engineers we're already short of each year in the UK, combined with the fact we're the profession that's only 12% female, we've got to be more inclusive in welcoming people who didn't do first degrees in engineering, helping them to transition into engineering roles. And then they bring all their professional background from a slightly different perspective, which I think will only enrich our engineering workforce. So I think there is a sort of bigger point in that. And then at the more trivial level, I mean, the thing that I constantly have, even now after doing this job for a few years, is just this look of surprise on people's faces when it turns out I'm the CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering. I'm definitely not what they were expecting. And whilst that's quite amusing in some respects, it can wear you down at times. But like Catherine, I think I've just tried to make a positive out of it and use it to make sure that people are more aware of the assumptions they're making and hopefully don't make those assumptions second time round. And
Catherine, you mentioned having to reinvent your mindset when he drew the graph. How have you found that reinvention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing for me, in answer to your question, is I don't apologise. I'm very proud of the degree. I did a degree in history and politics. I'm very proud of that. And I think, as you said, Hayatan, there's things that you can bring to bear on engineering from other experiences. But the most important answer I would give when I'm asked a really technical question is, I will go and find out for you. And then I jolly well do. And I have a joke with them. I had it this morning, actually. I was sitting down with one of our colleagues from the cyber business, and I said, could you do me a session on cyber for dummies? And they love that. They love it. Oh, they love that. So, oh, yes, I'll arrange that for you, Catherine, because they love telling you about their expertise. And the other thing, my husband's an engineer, so they love finding solutions. So sometimes I can go to them and say, I'm just hitting this wall here, I don't understand. The other thing for me is I really realise now I can be a role model and be an inspiration, and I don't say that in an arrogant way. I think the other thing that we can do, and I know a number of us in the room do this, is encourage female engineers to step up. Yes, you can do that speech. They quite like being behind the scenes, and I push them, I propel them, my stiletto goes up their bottom, and I say, go and do that speech, yes you can. And I like tapping people on the shoulder. I'm quite well known for that. So in a way, I can see the advantages that engineering can bring to a debate, and I like to push people forward.
So that's interesting. So you both have said your external perspectives have said you believe the profession needs to become more open. You believe that actually you've challenged in a good way the profession to be more accepting. And you've both, in your speeches, touched on the importance of visibility versus invisibility. And obviously, one of the themes of this evening and one of the reasons for the absence of senior women is sponsorship. Mm-hmm. We've done quite a lot of research on this. Only 3% of female leaders are sponsored. 2/3 of leaders say it's essential, but yet less than 20% have sponsorship programs. What role, if any, did sponsorship play in your careers? And I'm assuming if you had a sponsor, it was a he, not a she. Any stories there? Any advice?
Do you remember I mentioned the pink and fluffy comment? The gentleman who said that to me in the meeting, I responded, shall I go and put my tutu on now or later? I can't believe I was so cheeky at the age of 28. Anyway, he kept me back after the meeting and apologised profusely. He said, I realised my daughter is the same age as you. After that, he was my sponsor, and he really, really helped me. So there definitely was a gentleman who helped me. But there's also been women I've worked with who just gave me really nice tips, and they didn't even realise I was trying to copy what they did. So, but pick out your sponsors. Ask people to help you is the other bit of advice I would give. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. What about you, Hayatan? Did you have a sponsor?
Yeah, I wouldn't say in any formal sense. I mean, I've been lucky to work with all sorts of really outstanding people in different phases of my career, and I think I would, from every senior person I've worked with, I've learnt something. I think, if you're sort of scavenging for insights about how you come across or how people perceive you, you learn a huge amount from that. And I think there are people who've definitely, been supportive. Lots of people have been happy to go and have a coffee with me and all of that. And I think, if you have the mindset that feedback is really, really helpful, you can also learn from feedback. But really importantly, you don't always have to take it. So I've had the experience of people giving me extremely well-intentioned feedback that I've decided to disagree with because perhaps their vision for what a good leader is doesn't match mine, but it takes a degree of confidence to get to the point where you're able to say, that's really interesting that that's their perception, or that's your perception if you're talking to them, but not to feel that criticism is something that has to find its place in your self-perception. It's just information. So I haven't had formal sponsorship in that sense, but I've had many, many people who have helped me to progress. And as I said in my talk, I think the power of peers, you can champion peers. And it's just great to see how many people are looking out for that chance to say, there's a great person there. Thank you for asking me.
Were those
great person over there.
your peer power in that group, are those men, women, mixed?
Mixed. I would say more women than men, but not by any means exclusively. But I just think it's such a fantastic thing to do. If someone asks you, would you like to? And you say, well, no, I'm not the right person, but I know someone who is. And I take great pleasure in trying to kind of, as you say, push people forward who don't yet have that visibility to the same extent.
Okay, so that might be something to consider, is this power of peers in terms of not just having senior sponsorship, but also peer sponsorship. You've both touched on the incredible importance of culture, and you've both touched on the fact that culture will be by definition created by men, but it's a real opportunity to change it. Can I ask you, if there's one thing that should be changed about the culture that you've observed in STEM, what would it be, and what would you like to see men do more of that you think would help that?
Nice, easy question. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's my turn. I think a lot has changed already. I mean, even in the time that I've been CEO, I've seen changes about 2.5 years in. But if I go back over the time, say, since about 2002, since I've been around the world of engineering, huge, huge, huge changes. I think sometimes, when you look at statistics like the ones that I keep on mentioning around diversity in engineering, you start to feel that nothing is changing and it never will. You almost lose confidence and courage. And I can genuinely say that I don't meet a single senior leader in engineering now who doesn't say diversity and inclusion is core to what we do. There is no version of success that we'd be happy with that doesn't involve more diversity, and that's a huge step forward. I think in terms of what more can we do, I mean, I tend to sort of think that one of the biggest barriers is that we are so full of assumptions that we don't notice. And with diversity and inclusion, sometimes we get a bit anxious about, oh, we mustn't say the wrong thing, we mustn't do the wrong thing. And I think, we need to approach it with a degree of humility and honesty. We all are part of the problem, potentially. We're all part of the solution. So if you can, I've got time for a quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, I went to get myself a cup of tea. I was going to chair the meeting, and someone came up to me, a man, and said, white man as it happens, and said, oh, good, there's someone here to pour the coffee. And I thought, okay, here we go again. And I thought, well, I'm not going to make a scene, so I just said, well, I'm having tea, the coffee's there. Then he went to get himself the coffee, and I realized he had a disability that meant he needed assistance pouring the coffee. And it's just a classic example. He'd made an assumption about me, but I'd made one about him. And if we all just accept that we're a bundle of biases and assumptions and start from that and are looking for ways to, expand our minds and to learn, I think that is one of the biggest steps forward in terms of changing the culture. And I think there is much greater awareness now, but I think there's still a way to go on that.
And what about you, Catherine?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be struck as well. I mean, one of my initial answers is, and we've done this on the charter as well, that awful word manals. And I know there's a lot of politicians who will not speak at a conference unless there's, they've thought about it at least. And, I do see that as part of my role as calling that out. But actually, I'm so pleased, and loads of male colleagues really think this way too. If I get given a new brochure, I spend my time looking through it. It's my first thing, and I try and get my team to think that. So it's sort of like mindset and passing that down. And I have to say, I have had an immense amount of support from male colleagues who can see what I'm trying to do. I think I am sometimes a bit of a pain to them, because they, oh no, don't mention that to Catherine again. Don't tell Catherine. Well, I'm glad that they see myself as a bit of a policewoman on this topic. And I think it's inspiration, it's role models and encouraging more and more people to do more and to get out there, and this visibility point I made earlier is key.
So it's interesting, you've both called out culture, language, mindset. You talked about your nephew and the next generation as being the... So have you experienced any, or have you tried getting some of that next generation to reverse mentor some of the senior male leaders? And do you think that might have an impact?
Great idea. I'll do that. Thank you, CMI. No, and I think they would as well, because it really, sometimes for them, they're quite astonished when they hear some of these stories, like those ones I mentioned earlier. They can't believe it, and but there must be something that happens maybe in their part, towards their career that does change that. But I really, really do feel this, especially in the last sort of 5-10 years. I've really seen a mindset change, and I just love the fact that these young men are really taking this effort to support some of the charters we're doing, because they volunteer to do it. They give up their time. One guy gave up last weekend to do various International Women's Day things, and I find that incredible. And I really want to support them and their bosses, because obviously in engineering companies you have to let people spend time to go and do these things. It's all chargeable hours.
And you've done 2 charters, and do you think that that STEM would benefit, and maybe a question for you as well as the reverse mentoring, Hayatim, would benefit from a more concerted cross-industry effort on this issue, not just, let's say, the pockets of tech here and aviation there and defense there, or do you think it should be as it is?
I mean, there are a lot of initiatives, and the Royal Academy, I know, already do a lot on this. There's the Women in Science and Engineering organisation. We're very involved, actually, in an industrial cadets programme called Go For Set, where we really focus on younger girls in schools and getting them in. There's always a benefit in collaboration, and there must be a reason why these sectoral charters were created, and I think it's really good way, because other, sort of in my sector, aviation likes to know what other aviation companies are doing, and they sometimes do ask each other's advice. So sometimes these big umbrella brands and campaigns don't always work, but for me, I'm absolutely embracing the idea of coalescing around these charters.
What about you, and also the reverse mentoring?
Okay, so in reverse order, that we've talked about this before, and Anne's taken me to task on why we haven't done something like a Charter for Women in Engineering. And what we're doing is actually looking at this now. So the Academy runs a diversity inclusion leadership program where we work with many, many partners, many of you in the room, to try to kind of support each other and distill out best practice and create the evidence base in which we can develop practical interventions. But we haven't gone down the targets and charter route. We're looking right now to see, is there a case for that? Is there demand for that? And in particular, how would there be additionality, bearing in mind there are so many other charters, and people are reporting on their gender pay gap and their ethnicity pay gap soon and so forth. And so I think we just need to be convinced that we are doing something that really does add value to whatever else is out there. So it'll probably take us some months to get to that point. But if I take the work we did on the gender pay gap in engineering, it's not the same thing, but we were able to get 25 companies that collectively employed 42,000 engineers to share data that wouldn't otherwise be in the public domain, so we can show what the engineering gender pay gap is specifically. And that's, I think, another sort of way of corralling the sectors comprising engineering and trying to get that kind of collective action being more than the sum of the parts. So we're looking at it as a truth. Reverse mentoring, the nature of the academy is it's quite small, and actually in the staff side we're relatively flat. I'm really interested in this intergenerational interaction. I think that is a true part of what diversity looks and feels like. And we're going to do a governance review this year where we'll be looking at that as part of it. So I think it's a really interesting point. And I've got a 10-year-old son and a 8-year-old daughter, I should know that. It's interesting because my son just kind of got to the point where he's stopped being deeply convinced that the world is set up to favour women, because he sees, a mum who's out there working long hours and having a great time. He sees in his class at school, he feels that the girls are better behaved and they get sort of more rewarded by the teachers. And it's not that, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's really interesting that his starting set of assumptions are so different to what they would have been in when I was that age. And similarly, my daughter will get absolutely outraged if you tell her she can't do anything, which has its problems too.
Right. Well, I think, when you said, should I get my pink tutu now, you were reverse mentoring the chap that became your sponsor, right? So we're going to move on to do a broader panel, but before we do, what is the one short piece of advice you would give the people here about going further faster on this issue?
I mean, I would encourage everyone, any age, whatever level you are, to speak up if you see things that are not appropriate. And I asking my younger self, I would do that more. And I know it's easy for me to say as a senior person, but I do really, I think it's right to call things out. And this is on any kind of diversity, by the way. How can we speed things up? The whole thing as well, the role models, getting more women or young girls to think that engineering is a good thing to do. We need mathematicians. We need people with skills that we didn't think we needed 20 years ago. So there's a whole wide diversity of pool of people that we need in our industries, like designers, AI experts, people who know how to play computer games. And these are things and coders, these are things that women can do really well. So I think the pace of change in industry and innovation will hopefully force this anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, they say it's the pace of change will never be slower than it is today. Hayatun.
I resonates very strongly. I mean, I think it's be the change. We're at the stage now where there is a sort of, I would say, a crisis that we aren't more diverse. In engineering, it's a crisis at all levels. In other parts of STEM, it's at the most senior levels of the profession. These are literally world and future-shaping jobs. They are amongst the most rewarding, creative, high job satisfaction, well-rewarded jobs that are out there, and compared to many other roles, there are, you can be more confident people are still going to need these skills into the future. So the case for these, being fulfilling careers is huge. And then on top of that, for those of us who are already in these professions, the case for being part of making the way the culture and the vision of what the profession looks like collectively different is great. I mean, there's such a good feeling in thinking this change needs to happen, and I'm going to be part of making it happen, and I'm going to make it go as fast as I can using whatever leverage I have. And if we all did that, good grief, we wouldn't need these things in a few years' time.
Well, I don't know. Listening to both of you is fascinating, so I kind of hope that we do need them just so that we can hear from people like you. So thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, and let's get moving on that change. Be the change, as Hayatun says. Thank you. So, thanks, Catherine. So I would now like to ask, we have some further panel members sat here in the front row, and I'd love to ask them to join us. So if I could ask Mike Hay, Joe Muffet, Debby Forrester, and Helen Gordon to join us up on the stage. We're going to broaden it out. And while they're coming up, I'm going to say briefly who they are. So Mike is the executive chairman of Mott MacDonald, which is an employee-owned business that many of you will be familiar with. And Mike is also a known gender champion. He's won lots of awards for that, and also for the LGBT community as well. Helen Gordon is the CEO of the Science Council, started her career as a nurse and did lots of management and leadership roles across many institutions, membership bodies, many of them dominated at the top by men, and is also has led and managed herself a lot of organizations. Joe is the deputy chair of CMI Women and is the practice director at Atkins. Joe is a part-time winner of the Part-Time People Who Matter. So somebody who's actually made flexible working, so time-wise does this list, power list, work for her and had a successful career. And certainly, last but not least, Debby Forrester has an MBE. She has done another charter, the Tech Talent Charter, which has been very successful at driving diversity in digital, again, another difficult area. And I did see her nod when I mentioned the charter thing, so no doubt we'll come back to that. And then obviously Hayatim, you know. I just wanted to start by asking each of you, if you could give from your perspective, what do you think is making a difference to go further faster on this very stubborn and persistently stubborn issue? Let me start with you, Debbie.
I'll give two things. One, what we heard earlier, it's the shift from just talking about diversity for its own sake to inclusive culture. I think as people are getting it, we're getting some panicked companies who are doing what I call the diversity takeaway menu approach. I'd like 3 women, 2 disabled, and a neurodiverse with chips to go. And no surprises that bounces through. The shift to making really inclusive cultures for everyone, including the white middle-class men who are on the team, is really important. And 2, I think it's about collaboration. What we're finding is a lot of companies are discovering some great strategies, techniques, ideas, and the ability to then share that, to not treat it like a trade secret anymore, is where we're seeing things really moving on. Companies willing to come outside the silo, outside that competitive space, and to see that collaboration is the way forward.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, what do you think?
Well, what Debbie said, absolutely. The inclusive culture is really, really important, and it's not just about gender, it's not just about ethnicity, it's not just, it's about being truly inclusive to everybody. So working at moving the dial more generally around inclusion in our business culture is really important. Not being competitive, we were talking earlier about this not being competitive, that temptation of kind of holding on to what you're doing because of a competitive advantage and sharing that. Absolutely, I think the combination of those really will make and continue to make a difference. I think there's a really key piece around sort of making it around the head and the heart. So a lot of people sort of, I suppose, understand the business case around equality, diversity and inclusion, but they maybe don't have the heart piece. I think other people feel that it's the right thing to do, but they don't necessarily have the sort of logical framework or the knowledge to link it to the business case. So that's a really key thing as well, the linking the head and the heart.
The head and the heart. Okay, Helen, you've...
Just building on that, I think that certainly building the evidence base that diverse organisations do very well. I think that we need to shout about that growing body of evidence more. And I agree that this is too important not to share good things that make the culture or the change happen that's sort of really beneficial, but also to call out together areas that actually are not working well and the reasons for it, actually to actually surface that and to be really quite tenacious about making programmes of change really realistic and making a difference. We're bound to do better if we share more together, is my view.
Okay, and Mike, how can we get the other 91.99999% of senior leaders in engineering more like a champion? And what do you think will move that dial?
I think you've kind of said some of the things here. I do think that you definitely need leaders to lead from the front, and it's got to be leadership with heart. Actually, it can't just be leadership for the sake of saying the right things about EDI, and we've been seeing that. I think last 3-4 years there are lots of organisations still kind of doing that. So I do think that you have to work within your organisation and cross organisations to help somehow that predominantly male leadership come to the realisation that there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's quite a big step, because you'll get people standing up and saying all the right things around the programs that they put in place around EDI, but do they really believe that there's something broken, something that really kind of need fixing? So for me, my particular journey was definitely had an element of that. Probably 8 years ago or so. It's a bit of an anecdote again, so I apologise.
No,
but
that's great.
8 years ago, when we had 2 very talented women brought an idea to our then managing director to look at EDI more kind of holistically in Mott MacDonald and do something about it. And they were sent away with a flea in their ear, with in no uncertain terms, and not in a nice way. And I luckily got to see some of this stuff that they were proposing. And what I read shocked me, because I didn't know. I actually didn't know that some of these things that apparently were wrong were there. I'd been in this profession for 25 years, and I walked into work every morning thinking, as an engineer, loving what I did, and thinking that everyone else was exactly the same as me and thought exactly the same as me.
What were the things that were wrong, or the thing that was wrong that made you think, oh my gosh, I got to do something about this?
So so many different things, from the role models. So, how do you expect me to be able to plan my career when I come into work in the morning, and I've got no one to talk to when all of my design team, whatever it might be, wants to go for a beer at 6:30 at night and talk about the problem that they're going to solve the next day, when actually I can't. I don't want to go to the pub, first of all. I don't want a beer, and actually I can't maybe either. And of course, so many of these things, the other thing that you learn with time, so many of these issues that we've probably grappled with around gender diversity apply to men very often, just as much as women.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, what about presenteeism? Or, you couldn't presumably go have the beer down the pub. You're working part-time. Has that been a barrier for you, and how have you overcome that?
Well, I suppose you do miss out a bit on the kind of water cooler moments or the pub drinks and things like that. There's a piece about trying to be proactive, about suggesting alternatives that you can do, or just pointing out that actually having a variety of types of activities that isn't always Friday down the pub, because it's not just women that it excludes a number of people for a number of reasons. So being a bit proactive around that.
But yeah, do you do some of those things? The different things that aren't down the pub?
In terms of team activities, yeah, absolutely. So we go and do, I don't know, an escape room, for example, or something, some sort of team activity, or have breakfasts or something, experiment with coffee, having coffee and things at different times of the day, or different venues. So I suppose being proactive around that. Just picking up on the point about presenteeism as well, I think that's a really interesting thing, because, yeah, of course, I work 3.5 days a week. I've worked 3 and then 3.5 days a week for 17 years, so quite a long time of my career. And actually, there's a big piece around just focusing on what the outcomes are, what you actually manage to achieve, regardless of the time that you put into it. And the more that cultures and the way that we measure success in our business can focus on outcomes, the better it will be for everybody.
So Helen, you're an experienced line manager and leader. How much of this is just about good line management and leadership?
Well, it's got to be really effective line management and leadership in the ways that we've described. I mean, you can learn various ways of managing people that will be more effective, but you've got to feel it and demonstrate as a role model that you really care about people as well, is my belief. And particularly as, work life is very challenging, there's lots of change. People really do need to trust in a leader that can take you to a new place, but through as much of the heart as the head. So that means that there are many practices that actually ought to be good, and we mustn't forget about really good management, as CMI will very much espouse. But the good leadership that goes with that, to really like and want to be with people and appreciate individual talent and contribution, is really, really important. And that has to come from the top. Mm-hmm. It has to come from the top, I think.
And Debbie, you've done charters. Your charters have teeth. Do you tell us a little bit more about how you've made them successful? How do you incorporate head and heart? How do you make them work?
I think, and it builds on a lot of the ingredients that we've been hearing about here. To join the charter is free, but you have to have that senior signature. There has to be someone at the top that's got that credibility, the clout, the commitment to make things happen. It has to be there. We also require that they have to have a plan, because that plan has to look at how are we going to engage middle management? How are we going to implement things like flexible working? We then insist that they have to be willing to share best practice, what works, but what also doesn't work. What I love at some of our events, that we will have people who stand up and talk, and people from big companies like Cisco, like Nationwide, like Lloyd's, and will say, here was our plan, this is what we thought our return to work policy would be, and here's how it broke. Here's what didn't work and how we fixed it. The last thing is that data, and the data is really valuable. What's measured gets done. And it's the one part of our charter that has teeth. We have a minimum mandatory piece of data that companies have to share with us. Now, we anonymize it and aggregate it. We don't use it for naming and shaming in league tables. We think that leads to the wrong kinds of behaviors. But we take that data annually. We turn that into an annual report, but we also produce then a benchmarking tool. So companies can sit down inside the privacy of their boardrooms, their management suites, to say, here's where we're ahead, here's where we're behind companies like our side. Now, because we cut across all sectors, because everyone needs tech, we are getting then companies from engineering, from science, from finance, who are learning and working together. But I think the keys are the things that we're taking here. You have to have the headpiece. There is the business case on why it matters. You have to get the heart, and the heart has to give something about what's in it for everyone, including that middle manager. And it's about then walking that walk. It's about men being able to say that they want meaningful, flexible, part-time work as well as women. It is about people being able to talk about mental health. It's that intersectionality. And I think what we're seeing in the tech industry, you said earlier, this is a crisis, and Churchill says, never waste a good crisis. So this is a bit, it's so utterly broken for everyone. Everybody is so desperate to get the great talent, knows that they need the diversity to make great products. We have companies that are willing to think again, to do things differently, to collaborate even when it feels uncomfortable. And it is where we're saying, I'm not saying I have the whole of the tech sector, don't want them, don't need them. The market is going to reward the companies who are getting it. Great talent are going to go to great companies that are making a difference. And I think we are seeing incremental change. We are starting to see in our second report where there are correlations. Those companies that are doing returners programs, retraining, career conversion programs, they're getting ahead. And we know that our members are ahead of UK members. So it's about assembling that head case, the data, the evidence, the heart showing why it works, and then doing what's uncomfortable.
And Hayatim, you have often talked about, and you're all touching on this really, making this profession more collaborative, and bringing in, if we're going to solve the engineering crisis or the tech crisis or the science crisis, corona crisis, we need to be willing to open up the profession and bring in people, not just young people, but people at every level, and retrain them. You've got some examples of that. What maybe you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of building on what fellow panelists have said. I agree with all of that. To some extent, we've got to set our ambition level high enough. So if you say, that we just want to go up a percentage or 2% within our company each year, you're going to lead to a certain set of behaviors. And if you say, we want this company to be gender balanced at senior level by a certain date, you drive a whole other set of actions. And if you take the more ambitious end of that spectrum, then what you'll find is things like, we absolutely need to do something about this kind of bit in the middle. So in engineering, there's not a great entry, but there's also a huge attrition between entering the profession and getting
And
to
many
senior
more
levels.
women drop out than men.
Many more women. So something like 57%, I think, of the women drop off the register of professional engineers before the age of 45, compared to something like 17% of men. Forgive me if those stats aren't 100% right. I think it's about that. And so if you start thinking, well, my God, how on earth are we going to be able to have the pipeline in order to make those gender balanced senior appointments? You think differently, and one of the answers has to be, we look far more broadly for the talent that's out there. I mean, allegedly 2/3 of the workforce of 2030 have already left full-time education. Allegedly 1 in 3 babies born today is going to live to be 100. We are going to have incredibly long working lives. The pace of technology changes really fast. You can see there's data showing that companies are having to retrain far more quickly than they used to. And so we're going to have to be retraining and training up people to fulfill roles in any case. So why would we not use that as an opportunity to bring people who aren't yet in our world into our world? So a fantastic example, I don't want to name the company, but I think the biggest engineering employer in the country, met a fantastic software engineer from there who had started off as a psychologist. She'd gone to do some work in occupational health for a few years, wasn't really satisfied, saw an opportunity for a taster course, and had converted to become a software engineer. So that means that this software engineer is working in cybersecurity, combining her background in psychology and her skills in software engineering. What is not to love about that? And I also was really pleased that the UK government, when they published their AI skills announcement back in London Tech Week last year, had the specific reference to underrepresented groups. So they were, I don't know, a couple of thousand master's courses, conversion courses to enable people to learn, to train as data professionals, data skills, masters in data skills. And they said, we're going to make bursaries available to support people from underrepresented groups. So we take this opportunity to enrich our pipeline. So smart, doesn't cost you any more. And what is not to love about those things? So
well, and
those
indeed,
are examples.
It's true that, you know, and McKinsey corroborates this, that so many, the majority of men and women are going to need to be retrained to meet the demand on these skills. So broadening out and being less blinkered about where we get that pipeline is going to be a critical skill for everybody. Now, I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions, but before we do that, I just want to ask each of you in turn, you know, what is your one piece of advice for the people here to really be the change faster? What is really the one thing that, you know, if we just do that, please, could we do it and do it now? Who wants to go first?
Shall I have a go? But my advice has to be to probably not the majority of people in the audience, unfortunately. It's got to be to the men out there that are leading organizations, that are in leadership positions and management positions. And my advice would simply be, sit back and ask yourself, have you realized yet that there's something wrong that needs to be fixed? And ask that very deeply and very personally. And when you make your mind up what the answer is, go away and do something to fix it.
Great.
Can I go next?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Be really tenacious in ambition, I think, for this change. Be, you know, really put in place and seek out practical changes that really do support individuals to release the talents they have. They'll feel better. The organisations will feel better.
So mine is about trying to engage at all levels of the organisation. So it's absolutely responsibility of senior leaders. We talked about middle managers, but actually I think creating an inclusive environment is everyone's responsibility. So talking in ways that actually engages with everybody and then encourages them to think about what is the one thing that I personally can do that will make a difference. It sort of weaves into the kind of International Women's Day theme about each for equal, is what can every individual do that collectively will make a difference. So I think finding ways of articulating what it is as an organisations and culture that we need to do in a way that's meaningful to everyone, and then really mobilise everybody to make a difference.
So do something on an individual level, at every level. What about, I'll ask Hayatim last, I'll ask Debbie.
I'd say, building on what everyone said, don't feel you need to reinvent the wheel. Get out of your silo, connect, learn, collaborate, build off what has or hasn't worked somewhere else. There's enough great practice out there that you can refine that and find a way to build it into your work context.
I mean, I've already had the chance to answer this question, and people said lots of great things, so just a final addition to that would be we need to hold each other accountable, and we need to be relentless in advancing this. It's very easy, you know, we're in the midst of coronavirus right now. We will have some new challenge waiting around the corner for this to feel like the thing that, yeah, we know it's important, but it just doesn't get center stage. And I think we all have a role in making sure that when we look back, we're proud of what we each did to help make sure that we didn't let go of that thread.
So there you have it. And so peer pressure, you're basically saying power of peers, which I think is a great point. So you've got a fabulous panel here. I want to give you some time to ask them questions before we adjourn for nibbles. And of course, you're all going to have to do the each for equal thing before we leave. But please let me take some questions before we do that, starting with Jillian.
I'm Jillian Karen-Cumberledge from Fidelio Partners, and we build boards and leadership teams that are diverse and effective. We do a lot of work in the automotive sector, we do a lot of work in technology, and I've had the privilege of sitting on automotive boards. So and I have two questions. One very quick question is, what should the boards be doing? We've talked a lot about at executive level. What do you all expect from your boards, and are they doing enough? And then I have a second question. If we look at where the value, the really, really, really high value valuation is in technology, it's around AI now. And that is so male-dominated. And in fact, some of the segments of STEM, which are really, really, really driving valuation, you know, the diversity is getting worse, not better. So anybody who can think how we redress the lack of diversity in AI, I'd be really, really interested.
So two great questions. Who wants to take the board question? Maybe Mike as executive chairman?
I don't mind having a go at that. So I think, first of all, I would say that certainly on my board, as far as I'm concerned, if the members of the board don't totally 100% buy into our belief around the need for a more inclusive, diverse, equal environment, then they have no place on the board. It is as
Have you ever removed a board member?
No, but I would say that that's so I think it really kind of goes back to one of the things I was saying earlier on. I think that the many men in leadership positions just don't know that there's something that needs to be fixed. And so the real question actually is, how do you go about making sure that they understand that there's a change that they have to go through? And there are all sorts of different things that you that you can do. I mean, we talk about hearts and minds. I mean, there is definitely, you know, something around the business case that some people will find compelling. Some people won't need the business case. They'll just change their minds because it's the right thing to do. But the data thing's interesting as well. You've got to be very careful what you measure. And I think that one of the most compelling things for me in engineering, this probably touches on the AI thing as well, one of the most compelling things for me is that we all know it is extremely well documented that more diverse teams will come up with better solutions, more innovative solutions, and they'll do it quicker. And they'll do that in an environment that people feel engaged in and feel happy in. And so when you think of the things that you start to want to measure, is it about do you really want to be driven by gender ratios and things like that? Or do you want to be driven by engagement scores and productivity and all of the other things that you can use to measure the amount of innovation that's being generated within a team? Certainly within my board, we've kind of been through this journey explaining all of that stuff. Everyone's been sent through unconscious bias awareness programs, not training, programs, including sort of one-to-one coaching for weeks afterwards. So I think you don't have to go out there and find board members that will live and breathe EDI. I think what you can do is you can change their mindset.
And Debbie, what about the AI question?
Can I go back to one other thing about the board question?
Okay.
And I would say in the first instance as well, take a look around your boardroom and ask if there is true diversity going across. And one woman does not a diverse board make. Mm-hmm. It is about thinking about that in terms of intersectionality, and if you can't grapple with it around that table and do things differently and show women in an organization and other underrepresented groups that there's a pathway to that board, that it's really important. On the AI question and things, and when we talk about cyber, I think there's two ways that we really need to be looking at it. One, we have to go back to that early pipeline. We've said that again and again and again. We have to find a way of getting in and making STEM in full much more attractive to those under 18, and primary school's key. We know that kids don't choose a career, but they rule out careers between 10 and 14. So we need to really power up those organizations that are getting in there. But while we're waiting for that to change, we need to look at what we're training up right now. Because even if we fix education on Thursday, which we won't, it'll take 10 years before any company feels the benefit. And so it does become about these returners, woo the people back who've left, and those career conversions, because there's a lot of, there was an interesting study done by HP that said 70% of women were interested in a career in tech, 45% of them were willing and interested in retraining.
Yeah, women are good at learning. They like learning.
So we need to, for all of these underrepresented groups, we need to create more flexible routes in and make that, whether it's redeploying our apprenticeship levy, rethinking returner schemes, returnships, etc., but find a way of opening up the side doors and getting people into the sector.
There was a question here. Thank you.
Colin Brown, mechanical engineer. It's lovely to have a very capable panel here, and I noticed that 5 of you are wearing a ring on your wedding finger. And I'm wondering, at what point did you have a conversation with your partner about the fact you wanted to be successful, and therefore how important is the partner in your success?
Ooh, there's a good question. Who wants to take that? Helen, okay.
Well, husband number 2 has done rather well. I'll just say that. No, I think he has been immensely supportive. He's got 2 daughters, my stepdaughters himself, and he's passionate about just individuals doing their best, and it's made a profound difference on, how I live my life. I was ambitious before he came along, but I mean, there's no doubt that, sort of open conversation about what I want to achieve, our mutual goals, what he wants, and I'm supportive of him as well. Lots of debates and discussion about what is meaningful. He has his own company, so we're, discussing very, practically the kind of measures one would put in place to make the changes that we are describing today. So it's a very live discussion at home for number 2.
Hayat, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Colin. Well, so in my case, I'm very fortunate. It's not just about my fantastic husband, but about sort of ecosystem. So we live 2 doors away from my parents, not by accident. And it's a sort of mutual support network that goes in all directions. But I think the point around, is either of you making sacrifices, it's part of what's important. It's not the whole story, because my entire family know I would be a total nightmare if I didn't have a job that was rewarding and demanding. So sometimes I think it's framed in terms of, one person having to give up their career aspirations to support another. But I think it's rather, we're sort of got to make the equation add up, is the way I look at it. The equation is made of a number of different things. It's what makes you satisfied in life. It's what your family require of you. It's what you get from your job. And that equation has to add up. But you can reach that in a number of different ways. So support has been fantastically important, but nobody thinks I'd be a better mother or wife if I was around more.
And I think to build on that as well, that changes over time, that equation and how it ebbs and flows. So I've never had a conversation with my husband about, I want to be successful and therefore the support I need from you is this. It's a live discussion, and I think we both assumed that we both want to be successful in the ways that are important to us, and that goes to how you measure success and the respect that you have within a relationship, really, to support each other around that. So it ebbs and flows.
Can I add one other thing that's interesting? So I have an ex-husband and a partner, civil partnership, both men, both of whom are pretty good at this. And one of the values of those discussions is it also reminds me my partner at the moment is on this journey of trying to learn how to be an ally, how to be a champion. And those conversations and learning how I create safe conversations with him to ask questions, to say, I don't know what to do. I want to mentor a woman, but I don't want to get it wrong. And I think it's powerful having those conversations, because I do know more men who want to help than don't, but they're not sure how. I love that you had a kit for champions. There's so many men who want to, imperfectly, some days are better than others, and we do have some moments and discussions of white male privilege from time to time, and then we have a nice chat afterwards. But it is that journey and the conversations. I think inclusion comes so much more through conversations than policies. It's not just what you say from the boardroom and on the company day, it's those quarter conversations that bring people on the journey, and then everybody moves forward.
Great.
The interesting thing is that so many of these conversations can start at home. You can feel almost empowered by the things that go on at home. In my case, my wife is a bit of a cyclist, and this is probably going back about 6-7 years ago now, something like that. British Cycling brought out something called the Breeze Network. and which some of you may know about. So the Breeze Network is a network of women around the country who act as ride leaders to encourage women, only women, to go into cycling. And my wife signed up to be a Breeze ride leader. And this was in the early days of me starting to understand, you know, that maybe there was something here that needed to be looked at and fixed. And I sort of said, I remember saying, what on earth would you want it to be a women's only ride for? And she explained to me that the reason was that the traditional cycling clubs in the UK, although they very much welcomed women riders, they weren't welcoming. And a lot of women just didn't feel comfortable with the very macho, very male
Mammal, I think it's called.
Exactly. And so the Breeze Ride started. But the interesting thing for me was that started a conversation at home that then kind of empowered me a little bit to have different conversations at work. Mm-hmm. So my challenge was to her, but then I got a challenge back. And actually there was, you know, one thing I should have said earlier when you're asking what advice I would give to people, and I gave advice to the men. I think my advice to women in engineering was don't hold back from saying what you think to men in management and leadership positions. Challenge us. I think more and more you'll find that there's a generation of managers, a generation of leaders that actually need and welcome that challenge. So don't hold back, no matter how difficult it might feel.
Okay, great. I want to have time for one more question, maybe to the lady there, if it's maybe one question per person. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm Wendy Chown from the London Institute of Banking and Finance, and clearly I have a real vested interest in education. I'm very interested in Debby Forrester's comment when you said that we wanted to concentrate partly on the early pipeline, that we need to actually focus on that. And when you hear a comment that actually people rule out their careers between the age of 10 and 14, that's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. We had the same problem as you do in STEM in terms of trying to welcome women into finance. We're finding they're deselecting themselves. So my question to you is, what do you think that we can do cross sectors to encourage females to choose to elect subjects which will enable them that first, maybe not the second or the third later on, but that first entry into the industry? Because picking up on your point, Mike, we need to make it feel welcoming. And at the moment, I'm hearing they don't feel welcomed. Thank you.
Hayatim, you were...
Yeah, I completely agree that there are a whole range of factors that start to have a shaping influence very early in children's development. But I think we also sometimes, we shouldn't see that as sort of disempowering, because, for example, if we're talking about STEM today, women are by far in the majority of applicants for bioscience, medicine. These are courses that you may do identical subjects to, as if you want to go into finance or you want to go into engineering. But people are not seeing a future for themselves in those other careers. And to me, that should give us hope, actually, that yes, there are certain factors that come into play very early on in the sort of evolution and development of children that we need to be mindful of. But it doesn't mean we have to wait for today's 3-year-olds to go through a kind of much improved system before they can be future engineers or scientists. And so one of the things the Academy's been trying to do, we've tried to kind of, in the spirit of being as collaborative as possible, we've got an industry-funded campaign which many companies have supported, including some in the room today, which is called This is Engineering, and it's a digital marketing campaign. And we're just trying to harness the fact that social media is now an enormously powerful route to shaping young people's perceptions, to say, well, if we work with the creative agencies and digital marketeers who are day in, day out marketing brands to young people, what will they do with trying to convey our message? And actually the great thing is we will have a really fantastic message. The content of what we're trying to do is fantastic. And we produced a series of videos based around real early career engineers doing extraordinary but relatable things, very, very heavily quant tested through market research and through survey data. And since we launched that campaign at the end of January 2018, those videos have been viewed over 40 million times by a gender-balanced audience of UK teenagers. And we do perception surveys after each wave, so we do random sampling of the population, and you can see that whereas when we started, 39% of young people, so teenagers, said that they would consider a career in engineering. After when, I think this is going back the last 6 months, between 60 and 70% of those who'd viewed the videos said that they were willing to consider a career in engineering. The increases were over 100% for women and for black minority ethnic teenagers. And this is just a start, but it's an example with modest funding of what you can do when you start to sort of self-disrupt rather than just continuously trying the approach that we tried previously. Let's say, no, we need something different, and there are very effective ways to shape the minds of young people, so can we have a piece of them, please?
Yeah.
So that's
a great example.
So,
Do you
sorry.
want to?
Just to say, and don't feel you have to invent a new one. Across all of the sector, there are hundreds of amazing programs that are already reaching in. Young engineers, STEM ambassadors, teen tech. There are hundreds of organizations, and what I always worry about is when I hear another company who's putting thousands of pounds or thousands of hours into inventing a new thing, rather than opening the door, looking at your local schools, looking at your sector, and really putting the energy into that. That's what you can do. It's all there. We just need to really put the energy.
Well, and maybe as what you were all touching on before, when something works, as clearly this program that Hayatun was outlining does, then we need to get that out there. We need to share it and collaborate and say, yeah, let's do that. Let's do more of that. Okay, well, we're just about to start the networking, but I do want one more quick question, and it's going to the person there.
Hello, very interesting talk so far. My name is Maria. I'm a graduate design manager with Kia Construction. My question is, I've come across some young ladies. They've made it into the industry. They've gotten the foot in the door. They're starting their journey. And then they start to get an awareness of the situation that they're in. They're like, whoa, okay, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who don't look like me. I don't see the role models. What do you say to those people?
Great
In those kind of situations?
Great question. Who wants to tackle that one first?
I really, I can really sort of appreciate the situation you've brought to us. I think that certainly what I see helping, and what it's helped me as well in earlier in my career, was finding a network of people who could give me, confidence, advice, and just, a bit of moral support and courage to speak up. I think more so than ever, we've been reflecting on the importance of people being able to feel that they can speak up, but we also know that that feels very hard in some situations, and often it's those situations where the need to speak up is the most important. So there's some practical things about, joining a professional body, finding a network, having, a couple of trusted individuals that you can really speak to with absolute candour, and actually building the skills to be able to give feedback or speak up with confidence, but in a way that's going to land. We talked about the use of humour. It's hard sometimes to be humorous about everything, but learning some tactics to try and get your voice across in a helpful but a clear way is really important. But certainly network, finding peers, finding a mentor, and availing yourself of perhaps a professional network, may help your situation. I'm sure there's lots of other ideas as well.
Who else wants to contribute to this?
I think there's a piece around asking someone for help as well. Most people, if they were asked, would gladly give some mentoring or guidance. So there's a piece there around sort of finding those individuals and asking, because there's nothing to lose. The worst that's going to happen is they'll say, I'm a bit maxed out at the moment, but I can suggest someone who would be great for you. So being proactive in that sense. And I guess we've talked a lot about the different cross-industry networks and things that are there. There's, women in aviation and women in aerospace and women in rail and women in transport.
CMI women.
CMI women, exactly. And so there's a lot of those organisations. So if there isn't anyone in your company that you're working in at the moment using those networks as well, to just look a bit wider, and actually that kind of diversity of a different sort of viewpoint actually might help you think of things. You might get far more creative ideas than you would from someone that sat within your business as well.
And Mike, what should she say to, or
Yeah.
what would you say to her?
So So I think networks are important. So certainly in Mott MacDonald, one thing that we found is creating employee networks for a whole range of characteristics, whether it's gender or BAME or whatever, disabilities. So we create those networks to sort of join people together, because often you're working in quite a small silo. You know, you might be working in a team of 10 people or 20 people or whatever, and you may have no diversity within that group, whereas across 1,000 people or 2,000 people, you may have diversity. So you've got so the networks, I think, are important. The other thing that we've talked a lot about today is mentoring and having someone to talk to. And you know, this is where, from a business perspective, it becomes important for leadership again and management, because it's no good putting a business's effort into having senior women in leadership positions, just senior women in leadership positions, unless you've got the whole pipeline there. Because if you're a young graduate, you know, you might not want to be talking to a board level woman or whatever. So having that pipeline in place is absolutely critical. And I know from my organization's point of view, and probably everyone, that's the difficulty. You know, you can employ graduates. You know, we in our field of engineering, we'd typically be employing 35% women in graduate positions, and actually in senior positions we can do quite well as well. It's making sure that we have that 35% plus all the way through the organization, and if you can do that, then you've got mentors at every level. You've got someone to talk to as you go through your career. So my message is more for employers than it maybe is for you. It's not very helpful, but you know, for an employer, you can't just be looking at the statistics, whether it's gender pay gap or whether it's the proportion of women in senior position or in board positions. It's got to be all the way through.
So I think, just
If
the
you
last
can,
word,
the
and then we're going to wrap up.
professional associations are great as well, but also have a look online. I've been fortunate to be invited to a few really amazing WhatsApp groups. And if you look at that, these are groups of women who are online, and on those really bad days, or when you have that big question, that hive mind that you can throw out and do that. And if there's not one specifically for your sector, then shout out online and start one, because those powerful groups, and maybe within your professional association you can do it, but I've got 2 or 3 groups that I've been, just looking through the feeds sometimes is enough to remind me that I'm not alone in what I'm doing.
And that's an important thing to remember. You aren't alone. So we're going to wrap up now. I'm not going to get up and do a summary speech. I think I do want to hold you to doing the each for equal. But what I would say is, in addition to recognizing that the culture needs fixing, which has been a loud and clear message, and calling it out, I think Kath's example of, shall I put on my pink tutu, resonates with me. But calling out the behavior, I think everybody has an opportunity and an obligation to do that. Creating a culture where everybody feels welcome is incredibly important, and using not just holding leaders to account and the heart and the mind, but also doing that at every level of the organization and using peers. Which I think is a really important addition and something that you've used very, very effectively, Hayatim. And then collaborating, looking outward, not being so focused on, the internal of the profession, and looking outward for new talent, new ways of bringing talent in, because we just can't wait to fix the 3-year-olds. We are in a crisis. I think these are among the many solutions we've heard, and if I could just add one more, it is actually the title, which was on the opening slide, sponsorship. So sponsor those talented young women. That means you are going to pull them up and promote them, just like Kath outlined, and I'm sure that many of you have had sponsors, and it does make an incredible difference. So without further ado, I want to thank my amazing panel for all of this wisdom, and thank you to the great audience that braved all of these barriers and came here tonight. So please join me in thanking the panel.